Rob Berger here, author of Retire Before Mom and Dad. This is the chapter 9 video. Recall in that chapter I walked through different savings rate rules of thumb. You may have heard of many of these before. Save 10% of your income, save 15% of your income, and there are even some that say save 20% of your income. These are in and of themselves perfectly fine rules of thumb. Certainly if you save 10, 15, or 20% and you work sort of a traditional 40, 45 year time period, you'll do just fine. You should. And so there's nothing wrong with just saying, you know what, I just want to follow a rule of thumb and keep it simple and just do that. The thing I wanted to stress in this chapter and then later in the book, though, is that they may seem obviously 15% is more than 10, 20% is more than 15. I know I'm being Captain Obvious here, but I think we have the tendency to think, yeah, they're different, and it's harder to save at each level. They're not that much different. I mean, 10%, 15%. At certain times in our lives, it may be very difficult to get to one of those levels, but is it really that earth-shattering? Well, I do the math in the book to say, yeah, these are actually big differences. It's one of the things I've stressed throughout the book. Even a 1% difference, whether you're talking about your savings rate or your return on your investments, is huge, right? So we're going to use the calculator that we'd used and built in earlier videos and just get a sense of just how different these savings rates are, right? So let's start with 10%. So that if you recall from the book, what we assumed was a $50,000 annual salary. And so saving 10% of that would be $5,000. We're going to save it for 45 years. Again, that's just pick that number as sort of a traditional period of work from, say, early 20s to mid to late 60s, 9.3% interest rate. And there you go, $3.4 million. And I'm actually making sure that's the number I put in the book, and it is. So we're good. And all right, well, let's compare that to, say, 15%. So 15% would be what, $7,500. And the number jumps a lot, over $1.5 million. The difference between 10 and 15% is huge. Now, I should stress, we're not factoring in inflation. When I get to calculations of how long it'll take you to reach level 7, I actually reduce the 9.3% by the average rate of inflation in the US over roughly the last 100 years, which is roughly 3%. So I actually use 6.3%. But there's something else to keep in mind here. I'm assuming during this 45-year period that we never get a raise, right? We always make $50,000 and we always save either 10% over here or 15% over here. And of course, that's not quite reality either. I mean, there are certainly have been periods in my life where it felt like I was never going to get a raise or not much of one. But over time, incomes do grow. I mean, maybe not as fast as we'd like, but they do. So keep in mind that the math is spot on, but this is not, in some ways, it's an artificial calculation. Again, as I mentioned in the previous video, it's rare that someone starts off saving a certain percentage and never changes that during their entire working years. That's number one. Number two, you're not going to start at a salary, say out of high school or college, and never get a raise and always make the same thing for 45 years. But the point here is not to necessarily forecast exactly how life will turn out over the next 45 years, but rather to show just how different a 10% savings rate is from a 15% savings rate. It's huge. And of course, if we go to 20%, which we'll do here, that would be $10,000 on a $50,000 a year salary, 6.8 million. It's a big number. And so huge difference. Now, we can take this a little further even than what I did in the book. Let's think about progress. I talk about the progress principle in the book in a later chapter. And the point I make is, look, you may have a goal of whatever, saving 10%, 20%, heck, 50% of your income, whatever your goal is. But at times that goal can just seem impossible. And so one of the things I talk about is, that's okay, that's life. But we want to make progress to that goal. And the progress may seem slow at first, even if you're just increasing your savings rate by, say, 1%. That's a big step. It's a big difference over a long period of time. And you shouldn't beat yourself up because that's all you can do right now. And so what I thought here is, let's see what a 1% difference would make. So here we're saving 10%, right? So what happens if, and I'm going to use a formula here to calculate it. So we've got $50,000 salary, and we'll just times this by by 11%, right? Over here we had, to the left, we had 10%. So let's just increase it by 1%. And so we're saving $5,500. And the net result after 45 years is over 300 grand. Now, of course, if we adjusted it for inflation, both numbers would come down. But it's still a significant difference. And you've just increased your savings by just 1%. The key is small differences multiplied over many years matter. They literally can be life-changing. Let's say you could get to 13%. Well, now goodness, look at that. You've gone from 10% to 13%. I think if you ask most people, what kind of difference would this make? I doubt most of them would say on a $50,000 a year income with never getting a raise, the result is going to be more than $1 million extra in your bank account, in your investment accounts. So that's the real takeaway from this chapter. As you read further, we sort of refine how you can come up with the best savings rate for you, not just based on some rule of thumb, but based on your goals, your life goals, and achieving financial freedom, and how quickly you'd like to do that, and how quickly you think you reasonably can do that, right? But here, the real key was, here are some rules of thumb. They're not necessarily bad in and of themselves, although I think to blindly follow them is probably not the best optimal plan. And small differences, as I've stressed throughout this book, make huge differences to our wealth in the long run.